Hello and welcome, I'm ELD and we are breaking down all of the green cards from Kaldheim, starting out here with Arachniform for 2 mana. We're getting an enchant creature, getting +2/+2 reach, and every creature type is a card that very often is not going to work out in limited. One of the problems with enchantments in kind of limited formats is very often you'll go to play it on a creature and you will get blown out. They actually drive this lesson home pretty strongly in the 2-player starter kit that they just put out. It actually has a card, Colossification, which gives a creature +20/+20, and pretty much every time I've ever seen that cast, it ends up just being extremely disappointing. Very rarely do you actually get there. Now, granted, that's a much later state of the game by the time you have 7 mana available for that enchantment, so there are going to be some games where this will come down super early and make a creature just tower over everything else on the board, and if your opponent doesn't have removal, then you may actually be able to ride it to victory. But that is very often going to play out in exactly the opposite of what you're looking for, where your opponent is able to kill your creature and your buff here. It's one of the things that make equipment so interesting in Limited, is the fact that you don't necessarily lose the card advantage to removal compared to an enchantment. Battle Mammoth, 5 casting costs, 6/5 with trample is some serious stat lines here. Whenever a permanent you control becomes a target of a spell or an ability opponent controls, you get to draw a card, making their targeted removal significantly worse, no longer trading 1-for-1, potentially not even trading at all, as you may be able to draw into an answer for their removal. And you can also foretell this, making it only 4 mana. So, I mean, on curve, that's pretty fierce. I mean, even if you take turn 2 off and then have a solid 3-drop and 4-drop, I mean, that is going to be tough to keep up with, and potentially just totally stepping over those early skirmishes that tend to happen in Limited with those smaller creatures. Blessing of Frost, 4 mana, snow sorcery to distribute X +1/+1 counters among any number of creatures you control, where X is the amount of snow that you've used to cast this, and then you draw a card for each creature you control with power 4 or greater. I suspect people will enjoy playing this in Commander to just draw a ton of cards for 4 mana and buff the whole team. A little bit of a win more card. Not really the type of thing I generally would be excited to play in Limited. I'm more about, creatures and creature removal and cards that actually do stuff on their own, whereas a card like this, even though it can work out extremely well, very often this will not end up doing a ton. First off, you're not going to have a ton of snow mana in your pre-release pool, and second off, you may not even have that many creatures out, depending on the board state. Top decking this after a board wipe, for example, feels awful. Blizzard Brawl, 1 green, choose target creature you control and target creature you don't control. If you control 3 or more snow permanents, the creature you control gets not only +1/+0, but also indestructible. Then those creatures fight each other. That's a really interesting card. I mean, there's a lot packed into that. At the 3 snow permanents, that's going to be 3 lands for constructed. Now, this is an uncommon, so my first thought would be like Pauper. This could be interesting, though 3 snow permanents is a little tough in a stompy deck. A lot of the time, you're going to be happy to just have 2 lands out. But this, I would say, is going to find some play somewhere, as there are similar cards like Savage Swipe that are currently being used. I think I'd probably rather have +2/+2 than +1/+0 and indestructible, but this has a wider range of applications. Boreal Outrider, 2 in a green for a 3/2, and whenever you cast a creature spell, if snow is spent, if that creature enters to cast it, that creature enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter. That is a card that I would be pretty happy to sleeve up in my pre-release pool, basically giving all of your creatures +1/+1 that you're casting, and you only need like a snowland to make that work, which is nice too. It's not like the previous card where you want to have like 4 snowlands out to really get maximum advantage. Here, you only need a single snowland, and you're going to get a nice little bonus on all your follow-up creatures. Broken Wings, 3 mana to destroy an artifact, enchantment, or creature with flying. We've seen similar cards many times at 3 mana. I mean, I actually don't know how to evaluate this card. I would have to weigh in once I've seen all of these cards. It seems like it could be main deckable. It is definitely the type of card that you'd put at the front of your sideboard if it doesn't make the cut for your initial 40-card pre-release pool, given that this is going to be a great answer to creatures that have flying, which are often the most difficult to answer as you can't get bodies in front of them. It's really a question of whether or not being able to take out artifacts and enchantments is enough of a compensation for when you're playing against a deck that doesn't have any type of flyers. Elderleaf Mentor, 4 casting costs, 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token, 2 bodies for 4 mana, and I can't imagine, I mean, that's probably totally fine for limited, but as far as like pauper elves, when I see a new common elf, that's the first thing I'll think of, and the bar is just really high. I don't think this would actually be playable in that compared to, say, Lissalana Huntmaster, which is going to get you an elf every time that you play an elf spell. Definitely can outpace that card. Elven Bow, 1 green. When it enters the battlefield, you can pay 2. If you do, create a 1/1 green elf warrior token and toss this on there, and it's going to give the creature +1, +2, and reach. So you're getting a 2/3 for 3 mana with an equipment that'll stick around after it dies, making this probably a solid enough card. 3 mana to equip it is not super exciting, but it does give green a way to deal with those flyers as well, as it does not have a ton of flyers most of the time. It's not what green is known for, though they do get green dragons. Elvish Warmaster, 2 casting cost, 2/2. Whenever 1 or more elves enter the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 green elf token, and it only triggers once each turn. You can also pay 7 to give elves you control +2/+2 and death touch until end of turn. That's an interesting added keyword there. The +2/+2 probably going to be enough, but might as well give them death touch as well. That card seems like it'll be fun for Commander. The ability to get extra elf warrior tokens. Now, that's not going to spam the board quite as much as other elf combo pieces can. You're not really comboing here. You're really just getting value and then eventually having an overrun. So, I mean, this seems like it would be probably something you can find room for in your elf commander deck. Asica, God of the Tree, 3 mana, 1/4. This god has vigilance and taps for 1 of any color mana, and legendary creatures you control also get the same. So they're all going to be able to ramp up. But the thing that people are really excited about with this card is the back. The Prismatic Bridge, Wooburg, is going to get you this legendary enchantment. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you reveal the top card of your library until you reveal a creature or planeswalker, and then you put it into the battlefield for free. You're not casting it, so you're not going to get any cash triggers off of Eldrazi, but you're putting that into the battlefield. You're going to get your ETBs, and the rest go on the bottom in a random order. So for sure, Commander players are going to have a lot of fun with this. Can't really think of too many other places. That's kind of what a lot of these fun toys are going to end up being, is just things that you can play in Commander. From my perspective, I'm mostly looking at Pauper, I'm looking at Legacy, Vintage, Standard I don't really care very much about, and I think for the most part, Commander's where most of this stuff is going to end up being the most fun. Asica's Chariot, 4 mana for a 4/4 vehicle. Now, when it enters the battlefield, you create 2 cat token, 2/2 cat tokens, and when it attacks, you create a token that's a copy of a token. So you can get pretty out of control with this. That can be a really good value. And this cruise itself, this creates more and more cats, like a crazy cat lady. And if you've got really beefy tokens lying around, you can just go ahead and copy those as well. So I think this will be a very fun card for Commander. I think it'll be good in pre-release as well, as it's really something that can create a lot of advantage over time. I mean, you're talking about kind of 8 power for 4 mana. So I am on board this vehicle. Finn the Fangbearer, 2 mana for a 1/3 death touch. Whenever a creature you control with death touch deals damage to a player, that player gets 2 poison counters. So a return of poison. We'll see how much more of that there is in this set, but better than the original poison. I mean, originally things just gave you like 1 poison, so you basically have to connect like 5 times with a death touch creature in order to take an opponent out. So, I mean, that's probably fine if you can get a bunch of death touch going. At least it does damage and the poison. It's not like you're replacing. Like, that's one of the issues with like infect, is you deal damage as poison counters, which is not as good when it comes to racing. Like, sometimes an aggro deck will have the ability to deal poison damage and regular damage, and they're kind of pulling in 2 different directions, not really taking advantage of the synergy. Whereas this, you're doing both, so it's just a nice bonus. I would like to see more power on that, but I mean, it's probably fine. It trades with everything, so it has infinite power when it's dealing with other creatures for the most part. And when you're hitting players, then it's basically hitting for 4 damage at a time if you're actually going to be able to keep connecting. So when we're weighing it in terms of poison counters, so I mean, that's interesting. Or 5 damage. Yeah, 4 damage at a time, because it'd be 5 hits. Okay. Glittering Frost, 2 and a green, Snow Aura. Enchanted land is now a snow land, and when it's tapped for mana, it gets an additional 1 mana of any color. I mean, that will help in snow-heavy themes. You get a snow enchantment, and the land also becomes a snow permanent. So if you do have things in your pool that really care about the number of snow permanents, then this could end up being worthwhile. I generally don't enjoy ramp in limited, and I also don't usually enjoy taking turn 3 off like that. I mean, that's pretty passive, and I think a lot of the time you want to be more aggressive with your pool. Notvold Recluse, 3 casting costs, 4/2 with reach. Talk about aggressive, 4 power for 3 mana, and it can also get in front of opposing flyers. The only thing you can really say negatively about this card is the backside is pretty tiny, so it can trade with those smaller creatures on the other side of the board, but if you can keep those out of the way, that can wrap up a game very quickly. Grizzled Outrider, 5 casting costs, 5/5. That's a beefy elf warrior. I don't know how the bear doesn't get any love, but it's just a 5/5 elf warrior, apparently. The bear gets none of the credit for that beefy stat line. Guardian Gladewalker, 2 mana for a 1/1 changeling. When it enters the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 on target creature. We've seen this effect be passable in tons and tons of formats, so this can basically come in as a 2/2, putting a counter on itself, but you can also pump up one of your other creatures, and this can be really good when you're talking about recursion. If you're able to pick it up and put it back down, that can really grind out a game, but for the most part, this will many games come down as a 2/2 for 2 on the second turn, and hopefully have some changeling synergy with everything else that you've got going on. Horizon Seeker, 3 casting costs, 3/2 with Boast of search your library for a basic land, reveal it, and put it into your hand, shuffle your library. That is a solid enough mana sink. Now, that's not getting it onto the battlefield, but it is drawing a card for 2 mana, finding exactly the color mana you need. So this is the type of card that I would almost certainly, I mean, I'd be sleeving this up if I'm in green in the pre-release. Icehide Troll, 3 casting costs, 2/3, and really interesting upside. Worth noting that the Horizon Seeker can search for basic snowlands, which is more important than it might seem at first look. I mean, getting those snowlands out of your deck is going to be really important with synergy with things like Ice Troll here, Icehide Troll, giving +2/+0 and indestructible until end of turn, and then you tap the Icehide Troll. The tapping it is not super relevant. If you're attacking, tapping it doesn't really matter. If you're blocking, then I guess it's not there for like a second combat step. I'm not really sure. It's not obvious to me what makes it worth having that clause on there. I'm not sure what they're preventing. Maybe it's just strictly flavor driven, but the point is, this is going to be able to swing into just about anything. If you have 2 snow mana open, worst case scenario, you're going to bounce off of it, but very often they can't block. They're just going to have to either take the 2, or if you decide to spend the mana, then you can just push through the extra 2 damage, which is a very significant clock. In Search of Greatness, love the art here. We've got the squirrel and wolf. I forget their names, but they are really fun to see in tandem here. And this card, I think, is probably overhyped and also undervalued. So here's the deal. Like when Aether Vial came out, and this is not Aether Vial, but when Aether Vial came out, you had people that thought it was just like the most insane thing ever. And then you also had people who thought it was complete and utter trash. And it's not that the truth lies in the middle of opposing sides, but like people were basically talking about certain aspects of the card and just kind of not really understanding each other. So I think here, at the beginning of your upkeep, you can put a permanent spell from your hand with a converted mana cost equal to 1, plus the highest converted mana cost among other permanents you control without paying its mana cost. If you don't, scry 1. So, worst case scenario, you are, with this in play, able to keep digging during your upkeep with the scry 1. Now, if you have a permanent in play, you're going to potentially get a pretty significant mana boost. So if you have like a 3-drop, you're going to be able to get a free 4-drop, which is potentially worth the cost of having this card in your deck. So with cards like these, when I am assessing them, the question is, does this actually pull its weight? Because if you had a deck that was just in search of greatnesses, you literally can't win. Like, you're not going to win. Like, you're just going to play a bunch of enchantments and do nothing. So this is a do-nothing card that works well with other cards. So the question is the fact that this doesn't do anything on its own enough to compensate you? And I think it probably is. I mean, the scrying is going to help you dig. That is very significant. And then if you're able to drop a large permanent with this, I mean, that can really make a mess of things pretty fast. So I like the card. I think it's fine for Commander. It can do really crazy things. People will probably try and do some interesting stuff with it in just general constructed Magic. Now, you've already got Food Chain, which allows you to sacrifice a creature to go get, you actually exile it, but exile a creature to get more mana to cast other creatures. So you could potentially go Gurmag Angler into Gristlebrand. That's the type of thing people are thinking about this card. And I mean, it's true. Like you could actually have like a turn 3 Gristlebrand potentially with I mean, that's actually a bit of a stretch. Kind of hard to get Gurmag Angler on curve in that scenario, but point is, you can get a very quick bonus from this once it gets rolling, but it's also kind of shaky. So I would expect this to be a Commander card in the future. Speculatively, I have no idea value-wise how this is going to end up doing. It is just a rare, and it is kind of tough for rares to hold a lot of value with the current print runs. Jaspera Sentinel, 1 green for a 1/2 with reach. You can tap an untapped creature you control to add 1 mana of any color. So this is kind of just an upgrade for, I don't even know the name of the card. I play it in a black-green Aristocrats deck in Pauper. I literally don't know the name of it. It's from like the Return to Innistrad set there, Shadows over Innistrad. Loam Dryad? I think I did it. I think it's Loam Dryad. This one gets reach, and it's an elf rogue, so probably obsoletes the previous one. It is better, and you can jump in front of flying creatures, which are all over the place in Pauper. You got Muldrifters and Delvers. So Jorn, God of Winter, 3 casting costs 3/3. I mean, right off the bat, got to be pretty happy with that. When he attacks, untap each snow permanent you control, so he has a quasi-vigilance. And yeah, I mean, that's just like a lot of value. That's really something. Backside of him, Caldring the Rime Staff, 1 a black and a blue for a legendary snow artifact, and you can tap it to play a snow permanent from your graveyard this turn. If you do, it enters the battlefield tapped. So, I mean, these are solid cards. This is totally solid. Your 3/3 vigilance-ish that's potentially going to untap some of your lands. I mean, I would certainly be playing this in a green deck, and on the backside you have some potential value there, recurring creatures from your graveyard, snow creatures, or just the snow lands. King Harald's Revenge, 3 mana sorcery until end of turn. Target creature gets +1/+1 for each creature you control and gains trample. It must be blocked this turn if able. I would imagine this will see some Commander play in decks that really want to swarm, have some fun with that, and just wipe out an entire opposing player's creature base as you just swing and they have to block. Though keep in mind, have to block usually ends up tapping. Like they can just like tap their creatures for various things. So the things that you actually want to kill very often manage to avoid combat. Kaldheim, God of Kinship. 4 mana for a 2/4. As long as you control 3 or more legendary creatures, gets +4/+2 and has Vigilance. So we're talking a 6/6 for 4 in Christmas Land. All right. Now, it also gets Vigilance, meaning it will be able to use this activated ability. You look at the top 6 cards of your library, you can reveal a legendary creature and put it into your hand, and you put the rest on the bottom in a random order. So, I mean, Christmas Land, this is doing some work. 6/6, turning sideways, digging, finding more legendary creatures. A lot to like there. The Ringheart Crest, 2 mana legendary artifact, enters the battlefield, choose a creature type, and you can tap it to add a green to cast creature spells of the chosen type or a legendary creature. So you've got a mana rock along with a legit beater. I suspect that this will be a very popular card for Commander. As worst case scenario, you just get a mana rock, and best case, you actually get a undercosted 6/6 beater that is a draw engine. Yeah. All right. Lejara, Glade Warden, 4 casting cost, 3/3 changeling. You can pay 2 and a green, tap it, exile a creature card from your graveyard, and put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. You can activate this anytime you could cast a sorcery. So that is a solid use, I would argue, of creatures in your graveyard. There's a bunch of cards that kind of give you very small bonuses. It's not super easy to have creatures in your graveyard and the time and the timing to be able to do this. So this, I think, is something you're going to be totally happy to sleeve up. It's a little underwhelming on the stat line. Forecasting costs 3/3s are not, not your favorite place to be, but the fact that you can be getting 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature quickly gets out of hand. So if this can become like a 5/5, or obviously helping your other creatures out as well, I mean, that's going to be well worth it. Making use of those dead creatures, either that died in combat or that found themselves there any other way. Mammoth Growth, 3 mana to give +4/+4 till end of turn, and you can foretell to get this down to just a really good giant growth. So 2 mana up front, and it is an instant, so that is where you want this type of effect to be. One mistake I see beginners make all the time with pump spells is they will play it pre-combat and then swing. And what you want to do with pump spells is essentially use it as removal. Like, you can swing your 3/3 into their 3/3, and when they block, you can just go ahead and make your guy bigger and just squish their defender. Now, if you have trample, that's even better. You can respond to removal if somebody tries to do damage to your creature, then pump to save it. But in general, you don't want to use these just to push through extra damage unless it's actually lethal damage. If you're doing the final 4 damage with this, absolutely. Otherwise, it may not be the best use for the card. There are some exceptions. For example, when your opponent's low in life and you're also attacking with a flyer, maybe you want to get them close to lethal because you also have other spells you want access to. But in general, cliff notes, if you're just starting out in Magic with this type of effect, you want to make sure that you're using pump spells to get maximum advantage, and that's going to be killing creatures or saving your creatures. Masked Vandal, 2 mana for a 1/3 changeling. When it enters the battlefield, you can exile a creature card from your graveyard to exile target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls. I mean, getting rid of equipment is definitely worthwhile. Main decking disenchants is generally not good enough because they don't have a body. I mean, this does have a 1/3 body associated with it, so if in a situation where I don't know all the cards, I'm on board with main decking this. Of course, if you watch all of these videos, you'll know all the cards, so we'll be able to make the best informed decision on whether or not the utility of this is enough to offset the fact that the stat lines are terrible. You don't want 1-power creatures in your deck unless they're really incredibly strong. Old Growth Troll, 3 green mana for a 4/4 trample, which is just incredibly good to start. Let's see what's going on. Back in the day, this would have a huge drawback. I suspect this is actually going to be an upside. When it dies, if it was a creature, return it to the battlefield as an aura that enchants a forest. And the Enchanted Forest has tap to add 2 green and pay 1 and sack it to create a tapped 4/4 green troll warrior creature token. That is phenomenal. That is a phenomenal card for limited. A 4/4 for 3 is just gigantic. You don't actually deal with this. Even if you have a premium removal spell, they're still getting ramp, or, I mean, they're just getting a 4/4. This card is incredibly strong. Now, while this may not be something you get super excited about for Commander, given the fact that, 4/4 creatures aren't that big when you start with 40 life, for the pre-release, I would be very happy to be sleeving that up. Triple green does require you to be, like, very, very green, like green with a splash if you actually want that out on turn 3. Path of the World Tree, 2 green enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you search your library for a basic card, a basic land card, reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. And we can pay 2 plus Wooburg and sacrifice it to gain 2 life, draw 2 cards, target opponent loses 2 life. Path of the World Tree does 2 damage to up to 1 target creature, and you get a 2/2 green bear token. So that is just a ton of value if you are going to invest 7 mana, and up front it replaces itself. So, I mean, if you're actually going to go 5 color, which has been an archetype in the past, you're going to be sleeving this up. I mean, the fact that you're going to get a basic land, in general, when you pay the 2 mana, it is nicer if the land enters the battlefield, so you're actually ramping, but you are replacing, you are actually mana fixing, and I mean, someone's going to make this happen at the pre-release. Might be you. Ravenous Lindworm, we've got a 6/6 for a 6. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 4 life. I am on board there at common. That is like I mean, it's not a Thragtusk, but like, I mean, that's pretty solid. Offsetting those early tempo losses, the additional damage that you might have lost out on if you were ramping in those early turns, regaining that life, and then stabilizing with just absolute beef. That is, yeah, that's not bad. Realm Waker, 2 and a green for a 2/3. When it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type. You can look at the top card of your library anytime, and you can cast creature spells of the chosen type from the top of your library. Yikes. That is something. I think people will definitely try and find ways to use this. Right off the top of I mean, the first thing I think of is kobolds when I see this, where I'm like, oh, I can just jam kobolds just right off the top of my deck, no problem. Yeah, I'd have to take a look at some of the affinity creatures. I mean, there's some things you can do here. Now, this may end up just being better at kitchen table magic. You're probably not going to actually make this work in Legacy, for example. It's a rare, so Pauper's not an option. But kitchen table magic, this thing looks like a blast. Commander, you're definitely going to be happy to get a Future Sight for only 3 mana. And for your pre-release pool, probably a little tougher to make that work. But in draft, if anybody still drafts, I mean, they really are cutting down on the number of draft packs we can get. If we do get to draft, then you can cater your creatures around a certain archetype, or just have changelings which fit in no matter what. So I'm thinking this is a solid card. Rootless Yew, a 5 casting cost, 5/4. When it dies, you search your library for a creature card with power or toughness 6 or greater and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. All right, I mean, there's some card advantage there. That's not terrible. There's some value if they do manage to clear it. You're going to replace it with something beefy out of your deck, and that is potentially totally solid for a pre-release pool, assuming you actually have a top end bigger than a 5/4. Roots of Wisdom, 2 casting costs, mill 3, then return a land or elf card from your graveyard to your hand, and if you can't, draw a card. So we've got a regrowth kind of tacked on with a card drawing effect, and I mean, it's generally not where I want to be. You're going to get a land or an elf card back. Yeah, that's not generally where I want to be at the pre-release. I would feel pretty bad about sleeving this up in the pre-release. Rune of Might. Like all of the runes, you draw a card when it enters the battlefield. This one gives +1/+1 in trample to either your creature, or tack that on to the equipment that you might be passing around. So far, the equip costs have been fairly prohibitive, compared to other sets. Passing equipment back and forth is a major investment here. And I think what that really does is stops the equipment from being used in an attack step and to a blocker. You're often going to be able to find the ability to equip an attacker. That's often going to be worthwhile, but it's not so much that you're going to be able to just pass it back and forth. Like if you have a 3 or 4 equipped cost, I mean, that is pretty significant. Sarulf's Packmate. Sarulf's 4 casting cost, 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card, and it has Foretold for those 2 low payments of 2 mana. And if you're paying 2 mana for a 3/3 that draws a card, you'd absolutely do that all day long. That'd be good enough to play in Legacy, really. Like a 3/3 for 2 that draws a card. Yeah, that would be... I mean, we play like Elvish Visionary, which is like a 1/1 for 2 that draws a card. So, ignoring the Foretell cost, which you can't really do, but I mean, this is a card I'd be happy to play. And I can't imagine a Pauper scenario where this is gonna make the cut, but it's pretty close. I mean, that's just like a quality card. 4 mana, 3/3 that draws a card when it enters the battlefield and has a cost reduction. Sculptor of Winter, you can tap it to untap target snowland, a 2/2 for 2, and it's an elf rogue, and I mean, this is a winner on a lot of levels. So this is gonna mana fix, this is mana ramp, this is a snow creature in and of itself, it's a common elf. So, I mean, I think this has Pauper implications, I think this has Commander implications, and it's certainly going to be solid for draft or pre-release. So this card, I think, is very good. The fact that it's a 2/2 for 2 with the upside, I think is very strong. Snakescale Veil, 1 green, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It gains hexproof until end of turn. Is a solid response to removal, a 1 mana counterspell of sorts. And if you watched the blue video, I did mention I don't really like counterspells in limited, mostly because you kind of have to keep your mana open and they don't do anything. It's really hard to use that mana during the end step, and it's not like a constructed deck where you're happy to just make your opponent play during their turn and just play instant speed stuff and slowly improve your position. Here, Snakeskin Veil can be used as a counter to removal, any of the murder effects that we saw in black, and I'm sure we'll find in red direct damage. So you're going to actually protect your creature, give it a +1/+1 counter, and all for just 1 green. So, and it's a little bit of a combat trick as well. A lot of the time that +1/+1 is actually enough to just win in combat where you would trade otherwise. So I like this card. I like the hexproof. It's not the most ridiculous thing, but I think this would end up being playable, and I wouldn't necessarily want a lot of this card, but I would probably main deck a copy, maybe 2, and I would certainly have it at the front of my sideboard in case I'm playing against something with a lot of targeted removal. That's going to be an absolute blowout. Spirit of the Alderguard, 4 casting costs, 0/4. It's going to need a lot of help here. Let's see. When it enters the battlefield, search your library for a snowland, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle, and it gets +1/+0 for each other snow permanent you control. Sure. I think for kitchen table Magic, people are going to have fun with this. And for the pre-release, you're probably not going to have enough snow permanents for this to be worthwhile. You're going to need at least like 4 other snow permanents. Now, they do pump each other, so like in draft, you could probably go like heavy snow and still be happy having this like 4 casting cost, like 4, 5, 6 power creature. But yeah, I mean, it really depends on how late those snowlands end up getting taken, which they probably won't end up being super late. I'd imagine most people are going to have some benefit to having snow in their deck, so it's not likely you're going to get like 3 or 4 snowlands as the last picks out of each pack. Struggle for Skemfar, 4 casting costs with Foretell. You can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, then it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. I mean, it's a little overcosted. It is removal for the most part. Being able to pump your creature and then have it fight can be solid, and the counter does stick around, so 2 low payments again. Actually, less than that. They discounted even more. So this is an example of foretelling reducing the cost. So you pay 2 and then you foretell for only 1 green, taking it down from that 4 mana. The 4 mana is a lot, and Yeah, I guess the only thing is you can't cast it on that same turn. But yeah, I mean, that's fine. Here we go. Squirrel time. Toski. Let me know how that's said in the comments. I don't know how you will spell it out phonetically, maybe. Bearer of Secrets, legendary creature, squirrel, can't be countered, indestructible, can't be destroyed. When it attacks each turn, if able, but whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. There are a bunch of Coastal Piracy, Edric effects that let you draw a card for each creature that deals combat damage, and this one is going to, I'm sure, see play in Commander. We'll probably have it as a Squirrel Commander as well. I don't think that there's a good... I think they're all uncards right now. I think this might be the first Squirrel legendary creature that's not like a changeling, so... Yeah, this will likely be a thing. Probably not the highest power level. You're generally going to want access to other colors. Going mono green does cut you off of a lot of options, but I mean, this is the type of thing I would probably be able to build just to have a lower power level that can still do crazy stuff on occasion, but isn't like CEDH or isn't just like comboing off and killing people all the time. Tyvar Kell, 4 casting costs, Planeswalker, giving your elves the ability to tap for black mana, and his 3 abilities, +1 is going to put a +1/+1 counter on target elf, untap it, and it gains Death Touch, so you're ramping and getting mana. The 0 is just creating an elf warrior creature token, and the -6 is whenever you cast an elf spell, it gains haste until end of turn, and you draw 2 cards. Legacy Elves, already has a lot going on. Not really going to make the cut there. Commander Elves, probably going to find room for this card. Most of those builds are Golgari already, so you're going to move into a black-green build, and I think people will have fun with this. The emblem at the end, draw 2 cards and giving the elf haste, is going to allow you to really spam out the creatures. The elves tap for green, they have haste, so now they're actually able to replace themselves with black mana, and that is going to play out like a double Glimpse of Nature, which usually just wins the game. You usually get to play through like your entire deck at that point. And ending here on Vorinclex, really exciting card. I love the interpretation of him. He feels now kind of like a Norse mythology monster, kind of like the modern takes on Norse horror. Like there was a few films that have come out recently that have had that kind of monstrous Norse entity. I mean, you can't really use Lovecraftian. Like, it does have its own flavor and its own menacing style, and Vorinclex kind of fits into that while still feeling Phyrexian. So, this card just really flavor-wise is amazing. 6 casting cost, 6/6, trample haste, already dangerous Magic card. Already you're going to play that in your pre-release. On top of that, it's a doubling season and then some. So if a permanent would put 1 or more counters on a permanent or a player, if you would put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, put twice that many instead. And then if an opponent would do so, they put half that many instead, rounded down. So that is brutal. You're going to see that just menacing Planeswalkers, playing well with your own Planeswalkers, making a disaster for your opponent's Super Friends deck. And this one's going to be, I would imagine, one of the more sought-after cards. Now, there are a bunch of different versions of this, but, I think this is going to be a really I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up being like a $50 card like the Great Henge. I don't know how long that'll take. I haven't looked at the financial side of this at all yet, but just off the cuff, taking a look at this one, don't sleep on it. You're probably going to want to trade for this pre-release weekend, though I guess that's really difficult to do now, as we're not in the game stores. But, make sure if you trade for this from your friend, be careful, because they're going to remember. This one's probably going to end up being worth a bunch. So that is it for the green cards. We've got red, we've got gold, artifacts, lands. We're going to round out the rest of this. I am looking forward to the pre-release. And let me know in the comments if you guys want to do, if anybody's still watching at this point. What are we, like 40 minutes in? If anybody's still watching and you want to do a release event, we can make that happen. I can actually get you the product in time for the release, and we can play on our Discord server. I think that would be a lot of fun. If there's interest, let me know and we will make it happen.